Yeah, that's your
Great. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon to everyone here with us today at Seattle University School of Law and also out there streaming live on the internet. Thank you for joining us for Columbia Legal Services' second Advocates Lunchbox focused on children and youth projects, unpacking the plight of homeless students. Before I get into a little bit more of the introduction, I wanted to thank our partners, Starbucks, Boutique Helm, Seattle King County Coalition Against Homelessness, and Brandy Sinclair as well, and the many other partners who are here with us today. I wanted to say thank you because this Advocates Lunchbox series is really a community effort that aims to educate not just policymakers and the usual suspects, but really the general public on the importance of these issues relating to anti-poverty issues. So I wanted to thank you, everyone, for being with us today, and wanted to frame the panel by first sharing with you a short video documenting the issue of homeless students in Washington today through a CLS video.
Could I ask you not to sit there? Would it be okay if you sit down?
Gives you a flavor of what's going on today.
So there was the basement in Ravenna. There was my mom's apartment. There was our friend's mother-in-law apartment for a few months. There was my mom's again for 2 weeks. Then there was the transitional housing in Kirkland. I was able to move into the apartment we had before this one, and now we live here in Lake City. My daughter is very upset when I describe our former circumstances as homeless, because people have these images in their head of what homelessness looks like. They don't even know how many people they encounter on a daily basis are actually technically homeless. I realized that the job hunt was not going the way I hoped it would, and we would struggle to get into a lease. That was when it started settling in on me that our circumstances were very restricted. Things were much, much worse than I realized. Then from that point onward, you just start doggy paddling. Even though I went to law school and I'm aware of a lot of different tools, strategies for getting information, this was so personal and it was so close up in my life, it wasn't something that I would have been able to handle on my own.
One of our legal assistants actually received a call from Sarah Jessica. They forwarded me her information and I gave her a call to kind of figure out what was going on. She stated that she was having problems enrolling her daughter, Sophia, into the Spectrum program.
Sophia did the testing for the highly capable program called Spectrum when she was in kindergarten, and she got into that program.
She was told that her daughter couldn't enroll in this particular program because she was homeless. She was living in a transitional shelter.
Qualifying for Spectrum allows you to select any school that has a Spectrum classroom regardless of assignment area. Many more kids qualify for Spectrum than there are seats available. And because there had been some upheaval in our family, the principal took it upon herself to deny Sophia the opportunity to be in the highly capable classroom.
The case came in, and Katara immediately analyzed what the issues were, whether the district was appropriately implementing the law around homeless students. She brought it to the team. She said, I think that there is a violation going on here, and I think that we could do something to help this family. In addition, doing something to help this family would really help us be more effective for 30,000 other kids who may be in similar situations.
Sophia's case, she didn't leave school, but she was in an environment that she didn't know, that she wasn't aware of, and had to kind of figure it out from this environment where she, you know, as I mentioned before, started in kindergarten, you know, where she knew the teachers, she knew the community, she was used to going there.
Katara contacted the enrollment office and asked them about their procedure around the school choice forms, and, you know, sort of measured how much information they had and what their policies and procedures were.
Sarah Jessica is an amazing advocate. She has a really good understanding of McKinney-Vento, which is the federal law that requires school districts to identify homeless students and provide them with certain services. The McKinney-Vento Act uses the Department of Education's definition of homelessness, which is children and youth who lack a fixed, adequate, regular nighttime residence. And that definition includes children who are in shelters, in traditional shelters, on the streets, but it also includes children who are living in doubled up situations. And what that means is children who are living in temporary living situations with others because they lack other accommodations. So it can be two families living under one roof because they have nowhere else to go. What's so important about McKinney-Vento is it recognizes that what happens outside of school is just as important to what happens in school.
Katara is incredibly thoughtful about how are we going to solve this problem instead of just automatically reverting to we're gonna hammer somebody with the law, because that's not always the most effective way. It's about broad advocacy.
I was able to submit a records request with the school district and ask them for specific kind of enrollment data regarding kind of this school choice process around the Spectrum program. Analyzing that data on a spreadsheet, you know, we were able to see like something's not adding up here. And we were able to see that, hey, you know, around this time that Sarah turned in her form, I believe in March or whatnot, there were other families that turned in their forms around this time and they were able to get their first choice.
They had basically taken her form out of the queue.
In Columbia Legal Services, we are able to look at a serious problem like the fact that there are almost 31,000 homeless students and say, what are things we could do to help reduce that number and make sure that those kids are in school learning despite the fact that they may be going home to a shelter or sleeping in a van. And we're not just thinking, who can we sue? We're thinking, what are all of the tools that we have, of all those tools that we consider advocacy, which ones can we use?
Katara said, okay, I'm ready to send a letter letting the attorney know I'm now aware, have evidence of this child's, you know, school choice form being mishandled. And I said, go forth, do it.
Based on that, I think, you know, it took us like 5 months going back and forth with the school district.
Katara told the public schools attorney that we had the basis for a federal lawsuit and that we would move forward with that if they did not retroactively treat her school choice form the way they should have from the very beginning. And the very next day, a spot opened up in the Spectrum classroom like magic.
And so just based by negotiating and doing a little investigating, we were able to resolve the problem and get Sophia in her first choice. The biggest influence for me in becoming a lawyer is my faith, my values, as well as my family. I firmly believe that I've been blessed with the opportunity to go to law school, to go to the School of Social. I never ever want anyone to feel like they're trapped. I never want anyone to feel like they're hopeless. And if I can use whatever advocacy tools that I can to make an environment or a system better for families so that they don't feel kind of hopeless or trapped or that things can't get better, that's what I'm going to do.
to everyone for joining us today. I did want to acknowledge a couple of things. I actually am sorry, Brandy, that I mispronounced your last name. It's Sincere, Brandy Sincere. Allison Eisinger is from the Seattle King County Coalition Against Homelessness, and especially wanted to acknowledge Sarah Jessica, who is here with us today in the audience. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing your story with us, for allowing us to share your story on the big screen here. And as you can see, this story represents the kind of advocacy that Columbia Legal Services does. We use multi-forums and work on multiple issues in order to address the issues of poverty. The face of poverty and homeless students in particular in Washington State is very diverse. It is statewide. There are rural aspects, there are urban aspects. And the reason why we do these advocates lunchboxes is because it is a community effort. And although Columbia Legal Services uses a variety of legal tools, as you'll see from this panel, it really does take a community to address these big systemic issues. So I wanted to introduce and thank Lucy Helm, General Counsel of Starbucks, for actually taking the time today to be our moderator. Lucy Helm has been a partner at Starbucks for 15 years. She was appointed as Executive Vice President and General Counsel and Secretary in May 2012. In her role, Lucy leads the Global Law and Corporate Affairs Department, including 210 legal and compliance partners and employees in 16 offices around the world. She also serves as a member of Starbucks' senior leadership team and supports the company's board of directors. In addition to her work at Starbucks, Lucy is a member of the board of directors of the global humanitarian agency Mercy Corps. She also serves on the board of the Washington YMCA Youth and Government Program and the advisory board of Disability Rights Advocates, a nonprofit disability law center in Berkeley, California. In 2014, Lucy was a recipient of Legal Momentum's Woman of Achievement Award and was recognized by the National Law Journal as one of America's 50 outstanding general counsel. Her list of accomplishments goes on, and let's just say that we are so very fortunate to have her moderate this panel today. Thank you, Lucy.
Thanks, so I have the easy job, which is moderating. I'm a former trial lawyer, so I can ask questions all day long, but the content and the expertise is in front of us with the panelists. Let me just say my connection to the issue of youth homelessness, far from an expert on it, but I learned a lot because Starbucks partnered with the law firm of Baker & McKenzie and Columbia Legal Services to do a project we could do at our desks for people with homelessness, and that is we helped create a handbook, a legal handbook for the laws and regulations and in organizations that could help homeless youth dealing with those kind of legal issues. And learning that, we actually wrote chapters and did a lot of research and interviewed people, and so we learned a lot about the issues. But again, I am far from the expert on it. Instead, we have three really profoundly committed, passionate, educated, and expert people that are going to speak to us today in different facets of their work. You met through the film, film star Katara, Katara Jordan. She is, as you heard, a staff attorney at the Children and Youth Project at Columbia Legal Services. In that work, she engages in multidisciplinary advocacy through partnership with local universities, folks like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and local and national groups dedicated to ending child and family homelessness. Her work focuses on removing barriers to academics with students, especially around issues that impact children and youth who are low income, at risk for foster care. As you might not know, she was a student at the University of Washington. She had law school and social work, so has both aspects of her career. And this job came around because she wanted to do something that impacted people and that made a difference. And you can see from the video how much she does that. Another person that makes a difference in this community and is an expert in this field from a personal and then from her own knowledge is Brandy Sincere, who's sitting next to Katara. She is a staunch homeless youth advocate. And why? Because she experienced this herself. from age 14 to 19. She became homeless after her family, her mother and her sister, escaped an abusive stepfather, and with the help of friends, applied and was accepted to Seattle Pacific University during that period, became actively involved with advocacy and efforts related to homeless youth who share the concerns that she grew up with. While her success has been hard-earned and much of it self-made, Brandy encourages youth to take advantage of opportunities and the many services available to them, and is here to speak to us today about those. And then the last panelist, who I didn't have the pleasure to meet before, but her resume is pretty accomplished, and the commitments that she makes to these issues are quite strong. She's the Allison Eisinger is the director of the Coalition of Homelessness for Seattle-King County. She works to assure the security, safety, services, and housing and justice for people who are homeless, and advance the public and legislative policies and budgets that will solve the problem systemically. She is also a coalition builder, like all of these women, and she works in close coalition with the coalition's volunteer leadership and members, allies, and concerned members of the public. She provides strategic leadership to the coalition's public education and policy work. She heads planning for the annual one night count of people who are homeless outside, and develops creative collaborations to support the coalition's year-round work and special projects and initiatives. So before you say that, before you do anything else and ask questions and we introduce them, can I give a round of applause for the work you do? So I'm going to ask the questions, and why don't we do about a half an hour of questions, and then we'll open it up to you guys. So if you don't mind saving them until after the first rounds, then we'll get to your questions. Brandy, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind. Because of your experience, I'd love to know what were some of the personal challenges that you face, and what can you do from your experience that would help us understand these issues?
Well, a lot like that video that we just watched, my homelessness looked different than what people's first perception of homelessness is. I moved more than 20 times in high school and even up until my first year of college. And during that time, I think what surprises people the most, between living in so many different circumstances and so many different places, I never slept on the street. I never slept in a dilapidated building. I never slept in my car. I didn't have a car, but I never experienced what I think most people see or feel or view that homelessness is. Mine looked a lot different, and I know that's one thing that's surprising to a lot of people. The second part is that homelessness for me wasn't just about whether or not I had a place to, like a safe and stable place to put my head down every night. It was also something that at a point that after I experienced it for so long was actually structured into my brain. And I know this because after I stopped, after my life became more stable in college, it's still something that I dealt with, the feeling of homelessness, and almost embodying it all the time. It took a lot of time to work through that.
Katara, we saw in the video that your advocacy centers on students who are homeless, and you do a lot of work with that. What are the differences between children, youth, and student homelessnesses, and what considerations do you take into account when you think about their educational opportunities?
So we tend to use children and youth interchangeably, and so let me break down kind of those groups a bit. So children are typically we think of those as children 12 and younger. Youth, we tend to think of as kids 12 to 18. But then there's also this young adult component that includes young adults that are 18 to 24. And so the reason why these population breakdowns are so important is when we're dealing with just the issue of homelessness for children and youth homelessness, as well as student homelessness, there are different federal definitions that apply to each of those populations, especially depending on the context. So with student homelessness, we deal with the Department of Education definition of homelessness, and that is children who have fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence. So that can include a
situations such as, living in a shelter, living in a transitional shelter, living in a mobile home without running water, other substandard housing conditions. It can be living on the street. It can be living in a campground. It's a very broad definition of homelessness. And then when we think about children and youth and those age ranges, student homelessness can encompass ages from age 3 to age 22 in our state. And that's because, public schools oversee programs, and with, special education, kids may remain in high school up until 22. And so that large age range could potentially fit under student homelessness. And so, but we also have these other federal definitions, such as the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Their definition is a lot stricter than the McKinney-Vento definition, and it includes, very strict time, some time restriction. So, for example, a family who is temporarily residing with a relative or friend under the Department of Education definition would be considered homeless. But under the HUD definition, that family would have to know that they were losing their primary residence within 14 days to be considered homeless. Or for an unaccompanied youth or a homeless family to be considered homeless under the HUD definition, they would have to have moved 2 or more times within the last 60 days. But under the education definition, that unaccompanied youth or that family would automatically be considered homeless. Another definition of homeless, the Runaway Homeless Youth Act, and that deals with children under or youth under the age of 21 who are not able to live in a safe living environment for a variety of reasons. So there's these different definitions that we're often having to take into account and how they apply in different situations. Now, there's not one characteristic that defines the typical homeless student. Every student wants a sense of belonging. Every student needs that caring and consistent classroom environment, and they need something that's organized and predictable. And so that's the main considerations that we're thinking of when we're trying to reduce barriers to these students' learning and an ability to succeed in school. One of the things that we know is that these students often have frequent moves, so each time they're moving, that impacts their learning. Also, these students have limited access to food, mental health care, other medical health care, and those things also impact their ability to learn. But just the trauma associated with losing housing is huge, and we're expecting these students to figure out ways on their own to kind of cope with how that impacts their intellectual and social well-being. So we're trying to take all those things into account when we're trying to look at schools' policies or even look at our state policies on how we can improve those and reduce these students' barriers in school.
That's great. Allison, do you have anything to add to that subject as we're talking about the challenges and the broad definition of the different population that you're dealing with?
Yes, thank you. Well, I have been thinking a lot of late about what it means that we have a federal law that protects the educational rights of students who are homeless. Because I've been thinking that in this day and age, it is something that we could almost take for granted that the federal McKinney-Vento Act has these protections. Part of work that the Coalition on Homelessness does and that Columbia Legal Services does is to ensure that parents, students, community-based social workers are aware of the federal law and can use it effectively. But when I started in this field, it was immediately after the passage of the McKinney-Vento Act, which was passed in 1987. And I started out as a children's advocate for homeless kids and families who were living in what were called welfare hotels in New York City. And I started my job in 1988. And I have vivid memories of sitting in a principal's office with a young man who had been chronically truant because of his family's homelessness, and his mother and the school principal, who very casually looked at me, didn't even talk to the parent and the child, and said, we don't want those kids in our. And that's after the passage of the McKinney-Vento Act. So that is the kind of discrimination on a leadership level that a lot of kids have had to deal with. And then I spend a lot of time really learning what the fears are for kids who are homeless. Encompass things, again, that we tend to take for granted. So I ran an after-school program for kids who were homeless, but the irony was that for most of them, they were not going to school, so it wasn't really an after-school program. We spent a lot of time working on getting them into school, getting the transportation sorted out under this new federal law, and making sure that they had what they needed to function in school. And like a lot of after-school programs, we had kids come and take off their shoes when they first arrived. And there was just a revolt. You know, the kids did not want to take their shoes off. Why? Because for most of them, they did not have regular access to bathing or laundry facilities. And so they were incredibly embarrassed that their socks were dirty, full of holes, that their feet smelled. You know, there are ways to solve that, but you have to understand the nature of that problem. So I like to start there, because it is absolutely true. It is pretty hard to keep your mind on homework when you are not sure where you are going to be laying your head at night. It's also really hard to make friends. It's really hard to acknowledge to any safe adult in school, a janitor or a lunch lady or a teacher, what circumstances are. And that's even before you get to the loss of academic engagement, which is of course why we have a public school system in the first place. So I think it's really worth thinking about what we take for granted and what we want schools to be for all kids. The beauty of the kind of work that Columbia Legal Services engages in is to say this federal law basically exists to make sure that kids who are experiencing homelessness, which can look many different ways, have the same right to a good public education as every other kid. That's the simplest way to explain that law. And then from there, you start to unpack all the different ways that students, whether they are with their families or unaccompanied minors, parents, and others who are supporting them, need to be able to understand their rights, that they can participate in an after-school program, that they can get money to go to the school trip, that there are really resources that we have decided on a national level have to be allocated to ensuring that things are easier, not harder, for kids whose families are homeless.
Allison, I'm going to ask you another question. I know we've given this group access to some stats and data that they can take home and read more about the numbers, but without having to really touch on the exact numbers, give us a sense of scale. What is it in King County? You know, how many homeless youth are there, and how many of those are unaccompanied?
Wow, I do not have off the top of my head the answer to the last piece, so I'll have to get that, and we'll presumably find a way to share it with all of you afterwards. The documentation of youth who are unaccompanied, whether they're in school or not, is actually somewhat challenging, in part because of other laws like the Becca bill. But there are over 6,000 students in the King County Public Schools who are experiencing homelessness. And that is really a shocking number when you consider what the resources are that we have allocated to support and assist those students and their teachers. There is one school district in Washington State that has a full-time homeless liaison. Is that right, Katara?
There's
two.
more.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
more.
That are full-time?
Yeah.
Okay, how many?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but I would say there's at least 5.
Okay. It used to be that there was only one, and she was in the Seattle public school system, which is an enormous, tens of thousands of students in that system. And you know, what we see, of course, is that homelessness is not a static state. and there are a lot of children and youth who experience housing instability and homelessness throughout the course of a school year. And part of what we try to do is to acknowledge, first of all, that the numbers that are counted within the public school system are probably an undercount, and also that we need to put into place the kinds of supports and protections in the school systems that don't rely on students having to be identified so that they.
Go ahead.
Can I add on to a bit what Allison said from a statewide perspective? So we know that in 2013, 2014, that school districts identified 32,000 students. That's a 93% increase since 2006, 2007. Columbia Legal Services has been doing this work for over 10 years, even before I came on. And in 2005, there was about 13,000 homeless students identified. So the numbers keep rising and rising. It's like a tidal wave that we saw coming, and now we're trying to, do whatever we can to address it and build a community awareness. What we do know, and this is just an estimate, and I think this speaks really profoundly to what Brandy said about, her situation doesn't look like what we stereotypically think of as homeless. Because many youth who are homeless, they're often sometimes called invisible homeless because they don't identify themselves as homeless. And they, take extra steps to do whatever they can to blend in with often their peers, so no one, says, hey, they're not associated with that stigma, related to what we stereotypically think of as homeless. What we do know is that in 2012, 2013, we estimate that it may be about 4,700 unaccompanied youth who may have been in the school system, but we know that's a significant undercount. And let me just kind of break that down for you. So McKinney-Vento in 2011, in 2012, 27,390 homeless students were identified by school districts, and 60% of those students were doubled up. So they were living a temporary residence with others because of a lack of alternative accommodations. Now, Commerce, which it uses the HUD definition, they came out with a report analyzing data from that same year, and they found that 19,000 students were literally homeless. So it doesn't, match up to what we're seeing, what the schools are identifying. And that's not to say I think the schools are doing a good job with the resources that they have, but it means that we're not identifying at least half of these students that we could be. So in many ways, they are the hidden homeless, and they're out there, and we need to figure out a way to address their needs so that they can succeed academically. I mean, these students have the second lowest graduation rate of any group, and I think it's 45.1%. The only group that's lower than students experiencing homelessness is kids in foster care at 40%. So if we really want to take a stab at raising our graduation rates and reducing our dropout rates, we really need to focus on these vulnerable populations. And I just wanted to give you the state context on top of that.
So Brandy, what, as you listen to this, do you share some of the experience that we're talking about as far as passing and not wanting to identify with certain groups of homeless, and how did that impact how you feel as an advocate for homeless now?
Absolutely. When I was in high school, the only reason I was identified as homeless is because my mom, after we moved into a homeless shelter, went to my main office and kind of announced it to everyone in the building. It was like, okay, we need help. But we had been experiencing instability for years before that. And that's the same thing I find when I'm working with youth now and students now, is that a lot of the people who are getting services, it's almost after something catastrophic happened. Like, they went from living in a totally stable environment to like having no place to live. But it still doesn't catch a lot of people that have been have almost made it their living standard is living between family members' houses, moving between friends' houses. It doesn't really catch that population because you're right, they're blending in. I was blending in, they were blending in. And I would also add that there's not, in my opinion, not a strong incentive to identify as homeless, because in a lot of districts, even after you identify as homeless, there's not a lot.
You still have to fight.
There's not, sometimes you have to fight your school, sometimes you have to fight your homeless liaison, or argue with them, and then even if you're in a great school district like me, who didn't argue with me at all, they're like, yes, you're homeless, we don't need to talk about it. There's not a lot of it, it doesn't solve the problem of homelessness. Like, I needed a home, I needed safe and stable housing, and I didn't get that from my homeless liaison. And so I think if there's stronger incentives for students to self-identify, then they would. Yeah.
So let me follow up with another question for you, Randy. So what do you advise students when you meet someone who is homeless or experiencing those? How do you advise them to tackle this?
Well, it's not easy, and I would say that I'm not a direct provider, so I'm not an expert in this area. But what I is work with the National Association of Homeless Children and Youth on their scholarship committee, and that's 15 scholars from across the nation who experienced homelessness in high school or before that, and are going on to receive like extra education in whatever form that might be. So I work with them, and a lot of that is less talking to them and more them talking to me, and I think that's useful for anyone, because you really need to know you need to build a trust there, but you also need to know all the intricacies of their situation to really help them. And it's not like an A to Z situation. It's not like, okay, now that you've told me all this information, I can help you now. It's usually quite a fight after that. I know in Tacoma school districts, I've helped out with some individual students there, and it's not easy once you are working with a student and you really do want to help them, and they need housing. Even for me, who I know the local resources there, I had to work for months with a student, urging them to be like, this is going to work out eventually, this is going to work out eventually. And a lot of that included mentors and a lot of extra things that weren't school, weren't housing, but added to some sense of stability outside of their homelessness.
Thank you. Allison, can you talk to us about Project Cool and why it's important for the many homeless and youth and children in King County?
Sure, thanks. Well, Project Cool for Back to School is it's a project that I inherited when I joined the Coalition on Homelessness 8 years ago. And at first, I really had to scratch my head about why this coalition, we are not a direct service provider organization. We are made up of the organizations that provide shelter, housing, and services every day and every night for what is now at least 10,000 homeless people on any given day in King County. So I thought, well, why are we doing this? It's a backpack and school supply program for students who are homeless. And it's very fun. People volunteer and donate supplies and have supply drives at their schools and synagogues and places of work. And we have, something like 1,500 backpacks that get filled with school supplies every year. And distributed through our member organizations. But to be honest with you, I couldn't quite figure out why we were doing this project. And the answer is in part because there is tremendous opportunity to engage people around the very complicated, sad, and challenging issues of homelessness when you talk about helping kids get a brand new notebook that nobody's ever written in before and a set of pencils that they get to sharpen for the first time. And it is really a vehicle through which we have our community education and engagement work. Project Cool for Back to School is well beyond the backpacks, and one of the things that we started doing about 5 or 6 years ago is putting into every backpack what used to be, just a Xeroxed 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that talked about the McKinney-Vento Act, so that the students getting the backpacks and their parents and the social workers who were distributing them would understand what the federal law is. And that has evolved into our Understanding Homeless Students' Education Rights brochure, which we update every year. And we work closely with Katara and her colleagues at Columbia Legal Services to make sure that the information, but that it's also, you don't have to be a lawyer to understand it. And one of the things that we do, and this seems so simple, and it is so not, is we list every single homeless liaison in every single public school in King County, their names, their phone numbers, their email addresses, and then we also list who to go to if they're not responsive and helpful. And this year we were really thrilled to be able to list, in addition, Columbia Legal Services and Katara's direct number, in case people really need that additional legal assistance and aren't able to do the problem solving on their own. And what we've started doing is we started doing workshops. So Project Cool gets everybody's attention, it's very fun, and we said, okay, well now we need to really educate our members, the social workers at the transitional housing programs and shelters and mental health agencies. And we started hosting these, what were called at the time McKinney-Vento 101 workshops. They're now called Helping Homeless Students. We started getting phone calls from people who were liaisons in the public school system, people who worked for the transportation departments, people who worked, you know, who really needed to know this information already, to be honest with you, but didn't, saying, can we please sign up for your workshops? And we said, absolutely, yes, you can, because that is really what it takes to make sure that the culture at any given school and within district or county is one that actually does provide incentive for kids and their parents to self-identify in a respectful, private way. Project Cool, I think of it as a backpack and school supply project that is also a stealth advocacy project, because essentially, you know, we are now, we just sent our brand new Project Cool report out along with a cover letter that says, please call your state legislators to support the Homeless Student Stability Act, because to reveal the dirty little secret, you know, the backpacks and the school supplies are actually supposed to be available to kids who need them anyway under the federal, because it's a desperately underfunded mandate and because schools do have other things that they need to be doing. Okay, we'll provide the school supplies, but really this is about making sure that students get the education that they are entitled to.
That's great. So Katara and Allison, maybe you can talk to us. Both of you and your respective projects that you deal with have been successful because of coalitions and partnerships. And I know that you work with other groups on affecting homelessness and the advocacy work. Can you talk about some of your partners whose connection to this issue might not be apparent to others and what they're doing to advocate and change the conditions of people living with homelessness?
So I think the latter part is a little difficult for me to answer because I think most of our partners are really engaged in this issue, and the community does know. For example, we work really well with Mockingbird Society. They are a foster youth advocacy organization, but they are now really getting into the arena of youth homelessness advocacy because a lot of kids in foster care are transitioned into homelessness. And we work with the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance, which is also another phenomenal advocacy organization that is a huge coalition of housing providers and others in the housing world who really try to do systemic advocacy towards increasing affordable housing, preserving things such as the Housing Trust Fund, and other issues related to homelessness. We work with the League of Education Voters, maybe the faith communities. They are very active in working to prevent homelessness. Definitely Sketch, the Seattle King County Coalition on Homelessness. So a lot of our partners are partners that are very active in this one way or another, or have a long history of doing this work, whether it may not necessarily be directly related to student homelessness, but they are doing work related to homelessness and affordable housing.
Great. You want to add, Allison?
Well, our coalition has had some really interesting experiences broadening the conversation. One example is around access to other public benefits, and one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that the basic support structures that our state has provided have really been shredded, and we don't actually have something that can be called a safety net with any straight face at this point. So we work in partnership with groups like the Welfare Advocacy Group to do things like restore the 15% cut to TANF benefits that took place a couple of years ago. That is a really core issue in terms of preventing families with kids from becoming homeless in the first place. If you're receiving public benefits, you should be able to cover the cost of rent. And then we also work on public transit issues. And the fact is that transportation is such a huge cost for school systems, such a necessary condition for kids to get to and from school, that our work to secure the new low-income metro fare really ties in very well with this set of issues. So the Coalition on Homelessness is partnering with Transportation Choices Coalition, One America, and Puget Sound Sage to make sure that communities all across this region know about this new low-income fare that's going into effect March 1st, which is one of the ways that I think we can tie these issues together. You know, the crisis of homelessness and the lack of affordable housing, they're not going to be solved in our public school system, but the effect of these crises is one that the school system has to be prepared to address. And then we really do have to, bust through that prejudice that people have that, well, homeless kids, I mean, I hear this a lot, and you guys probably do too. Homeless kids, it's not their fault they're homeless, their parents made bad choices. So I think we have to use actually the power and the interest that people have in supporting students who are homeless to start breaking down some of the prejudices around why anybody in our society.
That's great. Let's talk about, we're in the middle of the legislative session. What are some of the current issues that we face, and how can this group know about it, and what should we be paying attention to and advocating for on behalf of homeless and particularly homeless students and youth?
So the homeless student issue and the homeless children, homeless youth issue. There's two major bills that we introduced this year. Is the Homeless Student Stability Act. And I want everyone to write this down, because if you have a local legislator, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do this, so I'm sorry. I want you to call them and ask them to support HB 1682 and SB 5065, and then the homeless. Okay, I will. HB 1982 and SB 5065. That's the Homeless Student Stability Act, and what that act does is it will increase funding to OSPI, basically create a state match, because right now our state only receives $960,000 that it distributes to 24 school districts to implement this act. That means 270 school districts aren't getting any funding to implement this. And as Allison mentioned, transportation is a huge cost. Under McKinney-Vento, students have the right to receive transportation to and from their school of origin. But right now, our state is spending $17.9 million transporting homeless students, which is critical. But it's only about 1,500 students that they're transporting. So we can use that money much more effectively, and we believe that housing is one of those solutions. The bill would establish 15 school housing partnerships that would partner school district and a local housing provider together to provide housing to those students who have the most need. And we know that this is effective because, for example, the King County Housing Authority partnered with the Highline School District. They housed 5 families, a total of 11 students, and they estimate that they saved $80,000 in transportation costs. So if we can do solutions, innovative solutions like that to keeping families located in their local district, that would be huge. So that's the first bill that we would really love for you to support. The next one, which I'm not necessarily the lead on, so I have to look at my notes, is SB 5404 and HB 1436. That's the Homeless Youth Act, and Mockingbird and Building Changes is the lead on that. That would establish a state agency for homeless youth in commerce, and which is something that we need, and it would create a policy, have our state commit to not transitioning any youth into homelessness from any of our systems. Both of these acts are crucial to helping us, tackle homelessness. And there's one more act, I'm so sorry, I don't know the bill number, the YEAR Act, which creates technical changes to juvenile records, and that is huge, particularly for youth who have experienced homelessness, who are now trying to transition into successful adulthood.
So you wonder why Qatar is an advocate? Anything else, Allison, you want to add?
Yeah, I'm gonna throw a couple more in the mix.
And we'll do questions.
So, if you go to our website, homelessinfo.org, you can actually download the template for our advocacy postcards. We call these our I Believe postcards, because at the front they say, I believe everyone should have the opportunity to live in a safe, healthy, affordable home. And they're just quick little summaries in addition to the 3 pieces of legislation that Katara spoke about that we passionately support, where we are asking the state legislature to make a $100 million investment in the State Housing Trust Fund. Our state invested $0 in our state affordable housing trust fund. That cannot happen again. We're also promoting a set of 3 fair tenant pieces of legislation that we think are really crucial to helping people who are homeless get back into market rate housing, but also to reducing the cost of being needing housing. And then there are some other pieces that we're advocating for, but I guess the point is that as I have learned in taking action on legislative issues, this week, next week, and the week after are the crucial moments. So if you don't already know it, we have an incredible state hotline, 1-800-562-6000, and it is a free hotline that is answered by real people that you can call from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday, and they will literally take dictation, take a little message, and send your message automatically to your electeds.
And I think what you should take away from this is these are people in the trenches here who, if they didn't believe this stuff worked, would not tell you to do it. They'd tell you to disregard it and give dollars to them instead. You should still give dollars to them, but I think that what you're saying is that each of you have the power to, if you're here because you're interested in this issue, and you can act with your pens, pencils, voices, and feet. And I think that means that this is just a little touch on some of the issues that might impact the issues that are of interest to us. The legislature is ours, and we need to take the actions that they suggest and what you're interested in to find out more and do some of that activity. So we're going to take some questions. I know you have some, and we probably have some that are coming on the internet as well through our website. So anybody have a question for this very experienced panel? Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mercedes. I'm a second-year law student here at Seattle University School of Law, and I have kind of a twofold question. So the first part of my question is, what kind of policies and procedures are in place for if a teacher suspects that a student might be homeless? And then what kind of improvements would you say we should make to that system?
So it's going to vary by school district. Last year, we worked on the Homeless Children Education Act to try to standardize this process a bit. So what we were able to do is strongly encourage school districts to provide training to their staff throughout school. I can't tell you what a specific policy looks like. What we would hope in terms of best practice is that every teacher in the school district knows who their homeless liaison is. And if a teacher suspects something, they immediately go to that homeless liaison and let them know what they're thinking. Does it happen that way? No. Sometimes teachers are circumventing that process and trying to do things on their own. Sometimes the homeless liaison really doesn't know much, so they're not sure who to go to. So ideally, we want every teacher and every staff person within the school district to know who the homeless liaison, and hopefully have a contact in each school building who can quickly connect a student who may be in need to that particular homeless liaison. And if the homeless liaison is not following McKinney-Vento, you should call Columbia Legal Services.
And I'd add, when we put these brochures together, we like to do the basic due diligence and make sure that the contact information is correct. And it's sometimes hard because the McKinney-Vento liaisons change, people take new jobs within the district. So we call to make sure that we are listing the right person, that it is their current phone number, and so on. I gotta tell you, it is not infrequent for the response to be, I'm not sure who our McKinney-Vento liaison is. In fact, I had one principal in one school district say, I think that's me. So I cannot underscore enough the extent to which this is not standardized and this is not prioritized. And again, it's not that schools are filled with bad people who don't care about homelessness. This is a deeply underfunded mandate, and schools have not, the part of the numbers of students identified in our school system has gone up so much is because there are organizations like the Coalition and like Columbia Legal Services putting the pressure on the schools to do the identification. But what comes next is sorely lacking. Students who are homeless are supposed to get free breakfast and lunch in the schools that provide them. Every year, we hear about kids who have been told on the first day of school in the lunch line, you cannot have lunch today. I don't have your paperwork. So what policies and procedures could be put into place? Qatar and I have talked about the fact that really what we would like is we'd like to see mandated training in every school district in Washington state. And that's a kind of a big sell. I think we might be working towards that in the future, but that's the kind of, first people have to understand what their responsibilities are, then they have to figure out how to implement.
That's great.
Yeah, I'll follow up on
Go
that
ahead,
too.
baby.
I would love to follow up on that.
No, please.
I would agree with both of you that it's different between school districts, and it's even different in schools and then different in classrooms. Like, it's absolutely, there's no sameness between any schools, and there's not even in my experiences, I have found a lot of different value systems that are being applied to this when you're talking to people in schools, teachers, staff members, counselors, bus drivers. Everyone kind of has a different view on it. And a lot of times, those students are the ones that are falling asleep in the back of the classroom. So that is a huge part of it, is that for me, I was lucky because I was attentive. I tried to come to school. I cared. I tried to show my teachers that I cared. I still fall asleep in the back of the classroom, but I think that there's a lot of biases that are in play for the kids that are not the good kids, the kids that aren't trying.
The sad thing is that we have to worry about somebody having a point of view on homelessness, as though we should have a point of view on it. Whether it's good or bad. Question right there?
Yes, so
Will you speak a little louder?
I'm a 1L at Seattle University School of Law, and I've done a lot of work around special education. And I would have to say that one of the biggest or most knowledgeable parent advocates that I ran into was a homeless mom. And it was really surprising to me because the problems that she was up against were incredible. And I thought, when I first came across her problem, I thought, oh, she's not going to have access to a computer, she's not going to be able to deal with this incredible monolithic system of Seattle Public Schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But she was incredibly well educated and very, very good at navigating the system. And so I'm wondering, do you do advocacy among families who are homeless yourselves, and how does that go?
I would love to follow up on that. I think some of the best advocates are people that have experienced it themselves and around them, that have watched them experience it. So I can say for myself that a lot of my time is working with students who have experienced it, and it can be incredibly empowering to say what you're going through right now sucks. But you know what? You're going to get through it, and you're not only going to get through it, but you're going to change policies, and we're going to go talk to some of the people that are making this legislation, and we're going to go talk to that principal and that homeless liaison, and we're going to tell them how important it is and how much of a difference you can make.
Pretty amazing. There's a question? Yeah.
Regarding was it HB 1982, which is increases the homeless liaisons. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when I read it, that there isn't a training component in there for homeless.
No,
liaisons.
there isn't a training component in the Homeless Student Stability Act. In the Homeless Children Education Act, which was passed last session, we fought hard to try to make it mandatory that each person in the school district receive training on McKinney-Vento, but we received huge amount of pushback from the school districts because they felt that they couldn't take on another mandatory training and that the training shouldn't be mandatory. So that was the best that we could get, that strongly encouraged language. Now, but what I will say is that if we are able to pass the Homeless Student Stability Act and there's that matching state grant, school districts that receive funding do have to attend a mandatory training that's actually put on by OSPI. And that training is pretty incredible for homeless liaisons that do receive that funding. I know that it's problematic that only these particular homeless liaisons would be attending. The feedback that we got from OSPI is that actually quite a bit of schools do attend training. But I mean, as we all know, you can workshop or a class and you can learn information, but if you're not applying that every single day, you're not going to, understand it or know it. And so it's something that we just have to continue working on and, pushing for.
Because I think that's the hardest thing I want that act to pass, but the biggest thing is that every single homeless liaison I've worked with, and I've worked with many in King County, none of them I feel like are educated in implementing McKinney-Vento. And so I'm like, what is the benefit of getting more of them if the ones that we have aren't doing the job that they should be? And it's mostly the teachers who are doing the work that the McKinney-Vento liaisons should be doing. And so that's my concern is that, and I didn't know the history about that the getting the training was such a big sell. I mean, it's not surprising no SPI, but like that's unfortunate because I feel like I worry that more homeless liaisons is not going to solve.
So, I think, Katara has experienced this at our understanding homeless students' rights trainings for the last 2 or 3 years, I think. That people from the school district, some of them McKinney-Vento liaisons, coming in part because they want to understand the perspective of the community providers. And we really want to encourage that because they need that partnership. I mean, a lot of liaisons say, well, this family just needs housing. Can't you just get them housing? And then we'll take care of the stuff at school. Would that were so easy. So we printed a whopping 5,000 of these this year, which is double what we've ever printed before. And if you want them, by the way, we will send you bundles of them to put in teen clinics, schools, wherever people might want them. I got a request from one of the school districts in King County, which actually has 2 part-time liaisons, and they do a good job. And they wanted to know if I could give them 5,000 of these. So they're hungry. We got requests from the Seattle Public School System to come in and train their folks. I mean, they are hungry for training. I think that is part of the problem, is that we don't have an infrastructure set up yet in the state to meet the training needs. Because OSPI does these 2 trainings a year, and if you can make it, great, and if you can't, that's it. But also, as Katara's comment highlights, you have to implement it, and the way you learn what works is to have support within your institution and not be told things like, yeah, we're not going to pay for a cab for that kid, find some other solution.
Yeah, and I would just like to add to that, just to be very clear, the majority of homeless liaisons are taking on multiple roles. And so what we've found is that they're only able to devote less than 5 hours a week to working with homeless students. So I just want to make sure I put that on the table. And I think the thing that Allison mentioned about the institutions, oftentimes the ideal homeless liaison would be just that, a liaison between the community and the school district, or students experiencing homelessness and the school district. But often they're working with this school district, the district infrastructure that doesn't allow them to do that advocacy role because it is an underfunded mandate. And so we're requiring school districts to comply with McKinney-Vento, but they're looking at us saying, well, what do you want us to do? Like, we don't have the money to do it. So I just want to make sure that there's this balance that I know that there's a lot of frustration with it not being standardized and that school districts aren't implementing training, but I do want to be clear that there's some really good homeless liaisons that are doing a lot with very little. So
That's great.
I just wanted to make
Other
that.
questions, you guys? Yep. Go ahead.
I'm just going to go way out here and just show my ignorance of both the McCleary decision and McKinney-Vento. But if McCleary says the paramount duty of the state is to fund education, oh, you guys are smiling. Is there a way to go in the back and say, okay, if your paramount duty is to fund good education, okay, you look like you might have something to say about that.
We agree that it's the paramount duty of the state. I mean, that's what our Constitution says. Now, we've tried with our Homeless Student Stability Act, we tried to get the liaison piece under basic education. Like, these students, homeless students, kids in foster care, vulnerable kids are not going to be able to realize the promise of McCleary if we're not providing additional support. You know, we've been kind of presented with this false choice this legislative session, either the safety net or funding education. We've been trying to communicate that message that the McCleary investment, while it's great, we need to fund basic education, is not going to have the results that they're, hoping for if we forget these populations and we don't serve them. Believe me, we wanted to get into basic education, but we were basically told that's not gonna happen.
Yeah, that was my ideal argument. I just wanted to tell everyone, like, this is, a homeless liaison is not like an extra.
Right.
She is the liaison. She is the way for this population, thousands of students, to get their basic education. And I didn't understand how you could make an argument against that, but it happened. It was political.
Yeah, it's political. I guess I want to say that this is also a time of tremendous opportunity. I mean, the McCleary decision has, in some respects, created a constitutional crisis in our state, and we have the opportunity to say to legislators, revenue is an essential part of our state's ability to meet our basic obligations. The same is true in terms of the psychiatric boarding decision. I think the fact that this is now the second year in a row that there is specific legislation that relates to students in our K-12 system who are homeless is huge. And there are many more years worth of legislative proposals that can be developed. And I also think, I don't know, it's maybe only the last 3 or 4 years, despite decades of work on the part of really dedicated people, like Jim Theophilus and Casey Drupin, that this set of issues has risen to the level of attention that it's getting now. And so this is kind of a golden moment to say, you know what, we need more homeless liaisons who have more hours for this to be their set of primary responsibilities, and they need to be trained, and they need to be held accountable for how well they are helping and serving the students in their schools. And there's a lot, I think that we sort of have an opportunity to lay out a 5-year scope of what we want to see implemented, not only in terms of state legislation, but in terms of local policies.
It is a kind of amazing golden period, given the state and the Supreme Court's final focus on the importance of education generally and the recognition of the basic failures of that and the fact that it is a right, and it's got, and the funding makes that accessible right. That this, I think it's a very good point, Brandy, what you made, not an extra. This is part of the basics, and I think, again, the education that you guys are doing and advocating for is going to take it a long way. Are we done? Are we time for one more question? There was a question.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Mo Winell here at Seattle University School of Law. I work with both the Outlaws and the Q Law, the Bar Association, so a lot of work in the LGBTQ that comes up a lot for us is that studies are revealing our GLBTQ youth are overrepresented in the youth homeless population. So I guess I wondered, from your perspective, what strategies work best to deal with this type of population that faces discrimination not only for being homeless, but has this kind of second layer of additional discrimination as a GLBTQ youth, and is probably homeless because of their discrimination as a GLBTQ.
That's not something that I could personally speak to. I do think it is an area that's lacking, and that we really need to focus on that particular population, because I think, as Brandy was mentioning about, youth homelessness and it being a hidden population, a lot of the youth, that are homeless, as you mentioned, are, leaving home situations where it just wasn't a safe place for them. And I think right now, we particularly focus just on homelessness as a general issue, but I think as we get more data and we're requiring the state to take a better interest in this, as well as, for example, the bill that I just mentioned, the Homeless Youth Act, creating a state agency to kind of look at these issues. I'm hoping that, issues around facing particularly youth from the LGBT community would be brought to the forefront. But I do know that there's groups that are particularly working on this issue, such as, I think it's LGBTQ allyship. I know that they're supporting the Homeless Student Stability Act, but I would be happy to connect you with others who are doing this work. But that's not something that I could speak to. I have no expertise in that area, only to say that it's something that we do need to do a better job focusing on.
Do you guys have any?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Brandy.
I consider myself an ally in a lot of different populations, and I'm so thankful that you brought up this question, because it brings up the fact that homelessness is all about intersectionality. Yeah, it's more than one thing. It's about race, it's about gender, it's about sexuality. There's so many different things happening in this community, and that's one of the hardest things to talk about in schools on every level. This is something I bring up. I do some workshops with OSPI when they're trainings to school districts, and I think that's one of the most hard-hitting things that I talk about. And like, if it's not safe in people's homes, it should be safe in our schools. It's, to me, totally nonsensical that we don't have gender-neutral bathrooms in our schools. That's ridiculous. If someone's place of home isn't safe to them, their school should be. And that's the conversations I think that we're getting to in the future, but we're starting at we're starting low, and we're hopefully building. And I think we need more and more allies for homeless issues and for every other LGBTQ issues and race issues, gender, etc.
Wonderful. Last word, Allison.
Well, I mean, I think what we need is we need your two groups that you work with to become deeply, deeply immersed in McKinney-Vento and work with us. I mean, there is tremendous racial inequity in terms of the kids who are affected by homelessness. If you start looking at special ed, I mean, it is appalling. So there have to be groups that don't necessarily consider themselves to be primarily addressing homelessness, getting involved in the mix and helping to educate the other organizations and lay it on for a better set of policies that really respond to kids' real circumstances.
Okay, you guys, be ready. I'm going to give you 30 seconds for your last wrap up that you'd want somebody to take home with them today as they talk about this issue. Who wants to start? I'm holding you to the 30.
And I think what I would just say is, it is fantastic to see you all here. I can't wait to hear your ideas for how you are going to take your interest in this issue and implement broadly, because homelessness is a crisis, really, as Brandy suggests, that reflects deep inequities and failures in our institutions across the board. So even if you're here because your interest is in another part of the law, we need you to be working with us on addressing these issues.
Perfect. Brandy.
Yeah, I would agree that this is an issue of intersectionality again, and that I consider myself a homeless youth advocate, but I'm an advocate for a lot of other good policies that affect the same population, but other populations. I'm sympathetic, and I think everyone should be, and empathetic, and I think that we can all, partner together and just create a better society as a whole. And I'm here for other populations, and I hope people are here for us too.
Okay, last one.
I would just say please continue to help us push this issue forward. We've been very fortunate, particularly with Seattle U, working with 1Ls and other classes that have really come up with some fantastic ideas that we were able to incorporate in the advocacy that we're doing. We actually have a current Seattle U student, I know this is over my 30 seconds, Michael Althauser, who is a 3L here at Seattle U. Michael! He is amazing, and I've learned so much from him. So if you want to get involved in this issue, please partner along with us. We can use your brains and figuring out how we can come up with innovative solutions to help tackle this issue. Thank you.
So here's, go ahead. I'm going to give you your 30 seconds.
Oh, great, thank you. Since I'm delaying in the video, hopefully I can say a little something. I came here to my alma mater. I was a law student here at Seattle University School of Law, and my daughter and I became homeless when I left law school. So if it can happen to me, it really can happen to anybody, which is something to bear in mind when you work with homeless people. They come from everywhere. And try to not have preconceptions about their life experience. But what I really wanted to let you know and remind you of is that you should never underestimate the power of a records request. What happened in my daughter's life, thanks to Katara, all hinged on the records request. All it takes is one advocate to shine a light on an organization like the Seattle Public Schools and say, I see what you're doing. Sometimes that's all it takes. It doesn't have to turn into a just showing them that someone is paying attention and noticing what they're doing to help support their bottom line, because I think a lot of what happened had to do with funding issues. I can't think of anyone more voiceless, powerless, and vulnerable than a homeless child. And sometimes budgets are getting balanced on the backs of those people who are least likely to advocate for themselves. So I think that's a lot of what that hinged on. And Katara is a relentless and dedicated and wonderful advocate. Every day she wakes up, goes into the office, and does it again. So if that's what you're looking to see, look at that lady, because that's what she's doing, and she's getting fantastic results and doing good work every day. So I just wanted to say thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, this could have gone a lot of ways. This could have been a terribly challenging and depressing hour, talking about all the issues that this faces, because there is nothing that is less challenging than this issue, really. But what we got is inspiration. We got inspiration from people that are doing this for their life work, commitment. We've got experts. It's not just people that come in and do it, and they know this is people with their expertise, their passion, their commitment, and they're doing this work. We have a state that's looking at this for a lot of reasons for the first time, because of Supreme Court mandate and other reasons. And there is positive momentum with the intersections of these various issues that are coming before us. And then we have a room full of you guys who care about this issue and take an hour and a half out of your day to really learn more. So it is an inspiration to be part of it, an inspiration to be part of all of you. I know that you're going to close up here, Michelle. I will. But it's been my honor to be part of it, especially to learn from all of you guys.
So I would just ask that we first acknowledge Lucy, Katara, Brandy, Allison one more time for just their so just the work that we do, you've heard about our work with children and youth, and that's just one small part of the things that we do at Columbia Legal Services. We do a tremendous amount of amazing, important work. And so for those of you who would like to support us, please do. You can go to Columbia Legal's, Columbia Legal at, what is it? ColumbiaLegal.com. Okay. .org. When I leave out the www, I just get all weird. Okay, www.columbialegal.org. You can go and then you can invest in our children and youth and the work that we're doing and all of our other great work that we're doing. One last thing, we're also looking for interns. So for those of you who are interested
Is Alana in here? No, she's not. Out in the hall, there's Alana, and we are interested in interns and volunteers as well. So that's it. Thank you so much for coming, and we will see you at our third Advocates Lunchbox, where we're tracking issues related to farm workers' justice and rights. So we'll see you next time, and thank you so much for coming out.